Welcome along. Thanks for joining Simon and I. We're here this week to talk about settlement agreements. Simon Fenton is the head of the employment law team at Fenton Elliott Solicitors. And Simon, I hear you and Julie talking all the time about settlement agreements. What are they?
Well, a settlement agreement is a really specific kind of agreement which documents the end of an employment relationship. So it can be complicated for an employer to say to an employee, it's not really working out, or thanks very much, our time is done, or we're going to make you redundant. There are procedures that are involved in terminating somebody's employment. Or you can just say, here's some money, please leave. And if you do that, then it's a good idea to get it documented. And the documentation of that termination is a settlement agreement.
So is it always redundancy, or is it sometimes actually you want an employee to leave because things are going sour?
Just there's so many reasons why it doesn't work out. And it can be redundancy, it can be their performance has tailed off, it can be they've had a spat with somebody, their manager, a colleague, it can be they don't turn up enough, it can be they're not very well. And essentially, employees have a lot of rights, and you can buy your way out of these rights. If you give somebody £1 million to leave a job, most people would say, yeah, thanks very much, I'll leave the job. That's the principle. The negotiation comes in depending on how far down from £1 million to zero it gets, right? The closer to zero, the more likely it is they're going to say no. So you've got to the employer has to pitch it right. It has to be an encouragement to leave. The employee has to accept, and then you document it in a settlement agreement.
So these terms are negotiable then?
Everything in life is negotiable. Generally speaking, the negotiation happens before an individual will come to us with a settlement agreement for us to advise on.
Okay. So from the employee's perspective, do they need a lawyer to engage with a settlement agreement?
Yeah, they do. And the reason they do is because it says so in law. About 30 years ago, the government decided that because of the obvious imbalance in power between employers and employees, that employees shouldn't sign away their very hard-won rights without taking legal advice. And that legal advice, if you don't get that legal advice, then the settlement agreement is not enforceable. So the settlement agreement is essentially this. I give you some money, you promise not to sue. Right, as an employer, I give you some money, you promise not to sue the company. Now, that promise not to sue doesn't count if the employee hasn't taken legal advice. So the sequence is, here's some money, let's get it drawn up in a settlement agreement. Take the settlement agreement to a lawyer. The lawyer will explain to you what it means and the consequences. If you're happy, you sign, the lawyer signs, you send it back, your employment ends, you get some money. You don't sue us. It draws a line under the employment relationship.
This all sounds pretty quick. Is it a long drawn out process, or is it quite efficient?
As far as we're concerned, if you come to us with a settlement agreement, I've been advising on settlement agreements for more than 30 years. They always come in a really similar form. So I know what they say. I can skim read them and know by the title what they say. I'll read it, obviously, to make sure there's nothing sticky or unusual in there, but I read them fairly efficiently. So they get sent to me beforehand. I read them. We have a phone call where the client has a copy of the agreement in front of them. I have a copy of the agreement in front of me. We start off, I ask if they've read it, how much they understand. There's some bits which are really easy, like we will give you £30,000, and some bits which are in legal jargon, and I explain those legal jargon bits. And if at the end of it, the employee's happy with what's been offered, we both sign, send it back to the employer, and then that's it. The employment comes to an end when it says in the agreement the employment comes to an end, which is normally a few days or weeks later.
You talked a little bit about the financial compensation in these agreements. Have you seen anything unusual in any settlement agreements?
Honestly, no. I mean, it just doesn't, it's money. Have some money. The more money somebody earns, the higher that amount is. I have had them where people are asked to sign settlement agreements for no money, and the advice in those circumstances is don't sign it. And that's pretty easy. That's some really easy advice. Why would you sign this? There's nothing in it for you.
So in terms of settlement agreements, we've talked about you advising employees, but do you also draft them for employers as well?
Yeah. We will draft them for employers. Often employers will say, well, how much should we offer? And the answer is generally a bit more than you want to, but a bit less than they're after. And that's quite subjective, but they know their employees and they know their personalities and they know the amount of money they get. So it could be it's sort of anything from 3 months additional pay upwards. I mean, I had one, I was acting for an employee, a senior employee of, I think it was Google, someone like that. And he was given and he was about to go on paternity leave. So he had a year's pay, full pay for paternity leave, and he was earning like £180,000 a year. And he was on a year's notice. So they gave him a year's notice on top of that. And then I think he had like a 6-month bonus. I mean, it came in at about £600,000. That was a good one.
Sounds it.
Yeah, that was a good one. But similarly, people will go for an extra month's money if, they're not happy either.
I guess sometimes it depends on the terms of your contract or indeed what kind of role you're doing for the company.
Well, you're entitled to your notice pay. You're entitled to any accrued but untaken holiday pay. So those are sort of a given. If it's redundancy, you're entitled to redundancy pay. And then there's a sweetener on top of that to encourage you to sign an agreement in which you promise not to sue them. And that's the bit that you are being paid for, right? They can just terminate your employment without that, but then you can sue. So the bit you're being paid for is the promise not to sue. And that can vary. And that depends on, it just depends on the parties involved, how much money that is. How much money would you take not to work here?
So a settlement agreement is the bringing to an end of the relationship between the employer and the employee.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't have to end that way. Sometimes employers just dismiss somebody for good reason or not. Sometimes employees resign, get a job somewhere else, or sometimes they retire. But sometimes this is appropriate. I don't know how often as a percentage it's appropriate, but we see these. We probably advise on settlement agreements 3 times a week. So we're very experienced at dealing with these things. We can pick out the knotty issue, if there is one, straight away, advise you on what the best way to handle that is, and deal with it. And in terms of the time it takes us, generally, it's probably half an hour to an hour on the telephone explaining what's going on and seeing if a client wants to accept it. And that's it. We don't act as grit in the machine, slowing things down. We're not conveyancing solicitors. We get on with it. We advise. If you send us a settlement agreement in the morning, we can have it done by close of play the same day.
Simon, thank you. That was really useful. I feel like I've learned a lot about settlement agreements in a part of the business I'm not involved in on a day-to-day basis. So if you're an employer and you're looking to have an employee leave your business and you need a settlement agreement advice, or indeed you're an employee who has been given a settlement agreement and need to make sure that it's a contract on the right terms for you, reach out to Fenton Elliott Solicitors. Simon and the team will be more than happy to help.